Thank you very much for joining today. We have an exciting session for our Self-Management USA monthly call. I'm going to do a couple really quick intros and then we'll get in here. I want to introduce my partner first. This is Kat. This is my community partner, Kat Higgins. She's an executive consultant and self-management enthusiast who has led transformations at Fortune 50s in finance, tech, and managed services. And she's a tireless proponent for equity and has no limits on the scope of her vision. She currently lives in South Bend, Indiana, near her 2 children and her pup, Cookie.
Thanks. And this is my partner, Dom. We're partnered here in the Self-Management USA community, former coworkers and aspiring best friends. He also, just like me, comes from agile transformations, technology, financial, across lots of industries. He's a forward thinker, definitely an empath, and lives in Charlotte with his wife and 2 kids.
Awesome. Thank you, Kat. And we'd love to hear about everybody else on the call as well. So if you want to put in the chat, where you're from, what your role is, any information about yourself. We're all about forming community here and learning more about everybody who's interested in these topics. We have a limited time box, so we're going to jump in here today. So I'm going to, we've got the agenda slide up. We are going to have a speaker for the first half. I'm going to introduce Alexis in a second. She does have to drop at 30 minutes into it. So then we're just going to kind of roll into open discussion. Just real quick, we want to challenge views with curiosity. So get ready to engage. But we are going to give the stage to to Alexis in a minute. Kat, do you want to go quickly over our monthly lineup?
Yeah, we have really exciting meetings coming up. First of all, I don't know if anybody's going to outwoo Alexis. We're really, really happy to have you here today, Alexis. And next month, Dom and I are flying to Austin. We're going to be broadcasting from Bangor Sausage and Beer Garden. We actually have a small special treat where we're also going to be doing a recording with the founder of Holacracy One at his house sometime from that day. I don't know if we'll be live, but follow us. And then in February, we have a panel of people who have or are managing other self-management communities that would help if you're in America trying to learn about these concepts. So just trying to share some of the resources for our community and act as, kind of a sounding board or a place where you can go to find lots of stuff. And then right around the corner from me in Michigan, Richard Sheridan, who's the founder of Menlo Innovations, which is a self-managing IT consulting services and application development firm. So we'll have him there too.
Awesome, thanks, Kat. And I put a little bit more information in the chat on that. But without further ado, let's open it up. So we're excited to welcome our volunteer speaker here today. We'd like to give, like I said, Alexis the undivided stage. So unless she prompts it, please put any questions in the chat, and we will be, answering questions afterwards. There'll be some Q&A, and then while we're doing that, please be brief. Try to time box it, give everybody a chance to ask questions. Like I mentioned, our speaker here today is Alexis Gonzales-Black. She's a partner and org design practice lead at August Public. She helps organizations make better decisions and work together more effectively, drawing on experience leading org design at Zappos, IDEO, and in public policy. She's also the author of The New School Rules and a longtime practitioner of agile, inclusive team design. Today, she's going to be speaking on decision velocity, tools to enable distributed decisions at scale, sharing practical ways to clarify decision rights, distribute authority, safety, and increase speed without losing alignment. Without further ado, Alexis, I'll turn it over to you if you want to share your slides and take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Dom. Hi, everybody. I mentioned this in the chat. My name is Alexis Gonzales-Black. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. I put the link in the chat. Excited to be with you here today. I'm doing an amended version of a keynote that sometimes I give. So just my first preamble is that we won't be able to get through all of it, but I am happy to share slides and the deck for anybody who wants to dive further into it or get into the details a little bit later. Today, I'm talking about decision velocity and essentially what I learned from being a practitioner of holacracy, of sociocracy in sort of my early days at Zappos and then distributed decision-making at IDEO as an org design lead in San Francisco, and how I've translated that into my work with large multinational, multi-divisional companies. And so I'm happy to share those stories with you along with some of the practical tools that I use to achieve decision velocity at scale. First, I did want to do a little bit of check in with the room, which is I'm curious what you all see as the toughest part of decision making, either in your organization that you currently sit in, or if you're a consultant helping other companies with decision making, what is the sort of common challenge that you see the most? So I'm going to invite you to get into the chat and kind of name the top decision dysfunction that you experience. Thanks, Charlie. Defining what the decision is. Great. Yeah, too many cooks in the kitchen. Okay. Who gets to make it? All right, we're going to be talking about some of these. Uncertainty. Fantastic. Okay, thank you for sharing. We're going to be addressing some of these topics today. And if I don't get to it, please feel free to ask me in the Q&A. All right, so who am I? Dom did a great job introducing me. I'm not going to spend much time here, but essentially I want to say for this particular community, the reason why I like being connected with self-management is because I really cut my teeth in the world of self-management. I was the lead implementation person at Zappos when we implemented Holacracy. I then sort of got bit by the bug and then studied self-management and specifically distributed decision-making for the better part of the last 15 years. And so that is really where I got my training. And a lot of what you'll see today, if you're familiar with TEAL or Holacracy or Sociocracy or other systems of self-management, you will notice some themes or principles that are resonant from those. Even though I grew up sort of working in smaller contexts, I've translated that into a career working with large multi-divisional, multinational organizations. You can see some of them on this slide. What's important to point out is that most of these companies are not adopting self-management writ large. As you might imagine, large standing organizations like Pacific Life, for example, 150-year-old insurance organization, aren't interested in completely reorganizing themselves, but are excited to become sort of adaptive and have tools of hierarchical adaptivity that they can use to flex their more formal structure into more agile and adaptive patterns, which is where this sort of toolkit I'm about to share for decision making comes up. Okay, so I'm going to say something I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir in this room, but just to do a little bit of level setting, decision making is a critical process in organizations. Many studies, including this one by Bain and Company, demonstrates that decision quality is correlated at 95% or higher with an increase in shareholder returns. And that means decision quality in how fast we make decisions, in the quality of the outcomes of our decisions. So it's well documented in many different places that decision-making is an important proxy for the quality of your business and the outcomes that you're able to generate. However, here's the challenge of decision-making. Decision quality is typically measured in hindsight, wherein we ask, how well was that decision made? And we judge it based off of the outcomes of that decision. And as we know, in highly ambiguous and uncertain contexts, it is hard to predict decision quality. So how do we, if you can only measure decision quality in hindsight, how can we be more proactive in helping to increase the likelihood of good outcomes in a proactive manner? And the research shows us that it comes down to 3 different elements that we can think of. So decision making expresses how 3 elements work together. The first one is structure, which is where authority lives and how decision domains are defined. So that's sort of your formal structure. Who has the authority to make decision making? Many of you commented on this in the chat that, like, you know, who's got the D is one of the central dysfunctions in most organizations of who gets to make this decision. We also want to look at process, which is hugely underinvested in. We often think about, especially in large companies, we think about structure as like, oh, I'm going to reorg, I'm going to redefine who has, you know, the R, who has the A and the RACI. But we severely under-index on the process, which is one of the most critical levers for determining decision quality proactively. What is the rigor of the process that we are using, the methods and the rhythms? And ultimately, what is the culture? Decision making is a moment where our culture that is largely implicit, these sort of dynamics of psychological safety or risk tolerance, or who is included and who is not included. Decision making is the moment where those things are expressed clearly and tangibly, which means it gives us a little lens to look at culture, your organizational culture, and say, oh, I can tell just by watching this room how power flows in this organization, how safe people feel, how included people are. And so decision making, as far as I'm concerned, and of course, you're asking somebody who's hugely biased on this topic, is probably the most important lever for organizational health, organizational culture. And that is true when I work with organizations and they, let's say, do run a Glint survey. A lot of times when you do the analysis of that engagement survey or Glint results, you're going to see decision making as one of the top 3 drivers of overall engagement in an organization. So it is an incredibly powerful mechanism, and we can learn a lot from self-management in how to do decision making at all levels and all sizes of organizations. Okay, so there are 3 elements that I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to get really tactical now. I'm going to kind of go down to the like, what do you do level. And there are 3 things. I'm only going to cover 2 today, just for the sake of time. We're going to talk about empowered decision ownership. So a lot of you in the chat talking about who makes the decision. And then we're going to talk about safe to try process, because even though it's not the sexiest element, process certainly is the most effective mechanism that I've seen in increasing decision velocity. So we're going to talk about this. I'll leave you with some tangible tools. And like I said earlier, happy to share the deck with Dom and Kat afterwards, who can then share it out with the rest of you. Okay. Let's start with a little quiz here. So this is a pop culture quiz. What hit Netflix show did Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix, almost pass on? Go ahead and pop your answers in the chat if you've got a guess. Oh, Mark. Mark is on it. Mark, is that a true guess, or did you know that? Wow. You should play the lottery today, Mark. You're getting pretty lucky. Yeah, so the answer is Stranger Things. So when the Stranger Things script was being shopped around to all of the major production outlets, it came across the desk of Reed Hastings, the CEO of Netflix. In many podcasts and in his book, he later talks about how right off the bat, it didn't jump off the page as a runaway success. You've got this sort of 80s style, retro. It's driven by kids, the kid cast, but it's also got sort of, more mature themes in it. And he immediately said, this is not for us. I don't think this is going to be a hit for us. Luckily, in this case, and as Reed points out later, he was not the one who was empowered with decision-making authority. He actually has managers on his team that have the authority to green light certain scripts. And a manager chose to disagree with Reed and green light this script. As we know, years later, this was a runaway success for Netflix. And he's so happy he didn't have the decision-making authority in that moment. Reed went on to talk about how his approach to distributed authority is one of the reasons why they can attract talent away from NBC, away from the bigger houses that have more traditionally owned having first pick of all of the scripts, because at Netflix, the managers on that team actually have the authority to greenlight and make decisions, even if more senior individuals disagree. And so this is the sort of introduction to the idea of empowered decision ownership. This is sort of one of the most central premises of self-management and self-organization systems, is this idea of making decisions closest to the work. Let's talk about what that means. First of all, we have the world's most popular decision-making framework, which is the RACI. And when I come into contact with a RACI, I'm often thinking about what is the reality of what's going on here. So if we look at a RACI, what it really means is the R is the person who probably should have authority, but doesn't. The A is the person who actually has authority and can veto anything, even with limited information on what is happening in the flow of work. Consulted are people who need to feel like they have authority. So they are listed as C's in the RACI, but when you go ask them, hey, Matthew, what do you think about this? And Matthew decides that it's not a good idea. Thank you. Matthew is disagreeing with me. It immediately gets vetoed, even though this person is a C. And our informed folks are the people who have authority over nothing, but are impacted over everything. So what I found over the years of being a practitioner is that RACI really only serves to document the dysfunctional dynamics that already exist in your organization, and it doesn't actually move decision authority closer to the work or give you any information on how these stakeholders should be treated in the process. And so, yeah, I'm glad you're on board with that, Charlie, because I feel like if there, is a bigger racy hater in the world, I would love to find them. I really struggle with racy. So let's talk about what I suggest people replace this with. The first is single decision ownership. And I'm going to define that by a couple characteristics, which I'll explain in just a second, and then a rigorous stakeholder map. Again, it's not magic, it's not science, it's just the fundamentals done really well. But let's talk about decision owner criteria. When I talk about decision owner, I mean the person who makes the decision, even when others disagree, and even when those that disagree are more senior. So I'm talking about single-threaded decision ownership. The characteristics that I typically look at are going to be expertise, data, time, and skill. What you'll notice is missing from this list is not seniority, not tenure, right? We often use those as proxies for who has expertise in data, but those are often the people who have the least amount of time and bandwidth to actually move a decision forward. And often we don't know whether they have the skill to solicit or time to solicit and integrate diverse perspectives. And so I'm looking for somebody who we would typically call the R, maybe somebody closer to the work, who should actually be the single-threaded decision owner. Now, does that mean that this person is alone in the woods making this decision by themselves in an autocratic style? No. They still have stakeholders to manage. And so I always suggest that we use a rigorous stakeholder map. I typically use this 2x2, which shows, I'm sorry, it's kind of hard to see, but it shows two dimensions here on the x-axis, who is impacted by the work, and then on the y-axis, who is influenced by the work. And so what I will tell individual decision owners are that you need to map your stakeholders and then come up with a way to manage these groups of stakeholders. So on the top left quadrant, you're going to find your folks who have high influence. These are the people who you need to kiss the ring before you're allowed to make it. Remember, we are not operating in self-managed organizations in this world. If I were implementing holacracy, I would not need a version of this, because the whole Constitution would outline a process for how that person makes decisions. I would have governance process to make those decisions. This is in organizations that are adopting self-management principles, but do not have the OS to sort of back it up, or the structure to back it up. So in these situations, you are going to have folks that are more senior than you, that you need to clarify guidelines, you need to clarify authority, you need to get them to tell you who I should talk to, who I should not talk to, and then lovingly get them out of the way of the decision. Your people in quadrant 2 in the top right-hand corner are your group of 7 plus or minus 2 that you're going to actively engage. And then, of course, you have your folks who you're going to seek insight from, and then the people you're going to cascade after the work happens. So this is a process, again, it's nothing sort of groundbreaking, this sort of 2x2 of impact and influence or a stakeholder map, but the clarity comes through in single decision ownership, and then the responsibility of the decision owner to map and manage these stakeholders actively. Okay, I've been talking a lot. I saw there's a question in the chat. I'm going to pause here before I move on. Peter said, what about frameworks that allow teams to make decisions, particularly for complex scenarios? Peter, do you mean like a holacracy governance model, or what do you mean?
No, I think I think they're I think that as we're moving with fast-moving complex situations, I am just seeing a lot of problems with single decision maker systems, and so I'm looking at at that.
Ooh, sorry, will you do me one more favor and describe the problem that you see?
Perfect. Okay, so there's an executive who wants to have faster decision-making and better systems. That executive is holding on to decision-making structures. And so simple decisions lower down in the hierarchy cannot be made without that executive's consent. However, that executive consent has a view of themselves that they are open and honest, open door policy. You can question all my, but it's horseshit. And so the very problem that they want to fix, they are the cause of, yet they can't see it. And there is no structure to allow for people to let the emperor know that he has, in fact, no clothes.
Yeah, that's a very, very common situation. There are a couple of things, right? The framework of decision ownership and empowered decision ownership only works with a degree of self-awareness, Peter, that you're describing. And a lot of times I have to work with executives to ask them questions like, okay, what is the criteria that you would actually distribute authority meaningfully to another person? And I have to often talk about the idea of boomerang authority, which so many executives give authority to folks as long as that person makes a decision that is exactly the same decision that they would have made if they were in that position. And so a lot of times at the beginning of these engagements,
in other words, and a really good decision.
Exactly. Oh, the best decision informed by the most wise person, right? Exactly. And so we have to talk about that level of discomfort. And I'll often kind of point out, little implicit norms that folks will share, like, oh, are we all comfortable with that? So people will use the language of like, are we all comfortable with that? And when I'm talking to executives, I have to ask them, is that the criteria for moving a decision forward in your organization? Is your comfort a prerequisite for any decision that is made in this organization? So there's definitely, to your point, Peter, not a framework that can solve this, but probably some leadership coaching and some leadership orientation that you have to give up front before any of these frameworks have a fighting chance to be able to actually have the meaningful impact that they need, which is always hard. I just want to acknowledge that, like, process and systems and structure and frameworks do not solve individual behaviors, mindsets, or people who are just determined to work in different ways out in shadow structures outside of what we are proposing. So it does take a concentrated effort to be able to write that. Okay, I'm going to share one more thing since we're getting close to time, and then would love to pause. I'm going to skip through all this because we already went through these folks. But oftentimes what we will end this presentation with is, if folks do not have explicit authority in a system and they are not implementing a system of self-management, that there are questions that they can ask that can help at least illuminate implicit decision-making authority problems and help shift some of that kind of opaque decision-making culture and bring it into the light. So we'll say you can ask questions like, who is the decision owner here? I know, absolutely breakthrough question. But if you're in a system where that is not the norm, that can really help. Or you could say something like, I propose that Tim is the decision owner here, since they're closest to the work. Can you come back to us with a proposal? And as stakeholders, I have to coach stakeholders on how to show up properly in this process, which is not as a devil's advocate or somebody who is trying to consistently hole poke, but somebody who can say, let us know how we can support you. What data do you need? What information do you need in order to be able to make this decision? So again, this is all operating in large companies where a lot of times the folks who should have authority don't. And so we try to figure out, how do we empower them at least with the right questions to ask to help shift some of this into being more explicit and visible. Okay, last one, and then I will pause completely for questions and discussion. But another pop quiz, which is, what division at Amazon began as a bet that few understood, but now effectively funds the rest of the company? Yes, okay, this one's an easy one, right? Because we all know that the money maker at Amazon is AWS. But what some of us don't know is the story behind AWS, where there were a couple engineers who said, look, we're constantly having to build our own bespoke platform on the back end of these things. Wouldn't it be great if we just opened this platform up, and we could start selling this platform so that other people could use it? And at the time, executives at Amazon said, that's a distraction. We need to stay focused on retail. There were a number of objections to investing in AWS. The point where it actually turned and the decision was made was when Jeff said one of his sort of famous Jeff Bezos things, which there are a lot of problems with how Amazon is run as a large company. But one of the things that I seek a lot of inspiration from is how Jeff makes decisions and how he articulates them. He said a lot of times executives will ask why, but they will forget to ask the other question that is equally as important, which is why not? And so let's talk about decision thresholds here, right? This is about what we call safe to try decision-making process. And if any of you have been in a governance meeting in holacracy or sociocracy, you've heard this before. But basically, we introduce safe to try decision-making because what we typically see is you can get in-meeting consensus, everybody nodding along going, yes, I think this is a fantastic idea. But then right after the meeting, you get the dreaded post-meeting blockage. They go into the DMs, they're chatting people in Slack and going, this is such a bad idea. I'm never going to be able to support this. My people are going to hate this, right? And that's when we get swirling the drain, we get stuck. And the reality is that people block because of uncertainty. Not typically people are not sabotaging decisions because they are maliciously trying to sabotage your organization. It's typically because of uncertainty and not knowing the answer. And so what we introduce is this sort of model where right now no is the default for consensus-based decisions, which means you can come to this committee over and over again. You can propose a decision until all of us say yes. The answer is no. And what we try to do is we try to widen the gap in the second column of the amount of decisions that are safe to try. And we do that by defining the difference between a valid objection and something that we see as safe to try. So what do I mean? Something that's safe enough to try is a next action or commitment that helps us make progress. It's something we can revisit and change in the future, or something that we can learn from either way. Again, to borrow an idea from Amazon and Jeff, this is typically a two-way door decision, something that we can learn from, pivot if needed. Now, there are valid objections, right? Which is that you actually hold information, not may, might, or could cause something bad, but I actually know based off my lived experience or some data that I have that this decision will cause us harm, move us backwards, or the impact will be so quick we won't be able to recover, or this decision I know will move us backwards from our purpose. The place where we get tripped up in organizations is in the middle, because we treat these things as if they are valid objections when really they are hesitations that are still safe to try. So these are things like, this isn't my idea, like Peter, I have a different idea. I'm the executive. This isn't my top choice. Is that an objection? No, it is not an objection. It is simply expressing a different sort of idea or a preference, but it doesn't mean that this decision is unsafe to try. Or you might say, this doesn't address a related problem I'm seeing, or I'm worried this may, might, or could cause a problem in the future. A lot of times in organizations, the most powerful thing that I do is retrain teams on understanding the difference between an objection or a hesitation. So when you are faced with a hesitation, you can say something like, that's really interesting data. Thank you for bringing that up. I will keep my ear to the ground on that, but that is not a reason why we should not continue making this decision. And that is the most powerful unblocker that we've seen to decision velocity in any of the organizations that we work with. And Kat, you said as logical and a hesitation is emotional. No, I don't think so. I mean, I think there are valid objections that, there are hesitations that are logical hesitations, but I think you really need to think as a scientist and kind of unearth whether or not, the data that you're holding is a reason why this could cause harm or move us backward. A lot of it is logical. A lot of it you might say, there's another related problem that we should absolutely address that's in with this. And that is a logical answer and reaction. Does that mean that we should solve it now in this meeting? No. Does it mean that we should solve that problem? Yes, we should definitely put that somewhere. That needs to go somewhere where it's solved. So I don't want to paint these as all being like emotional or intuitive or something like that. There are very logical hesitations, but you need to be really careful on whether or not you let that stop your process or whether or not we move forward with it.
I guess the question is, do you need people to get to psychological safety on the decision in order to move forward with it? Or are you telling them you're going to live with some discomfort, you may not achieve psychological safety, and we're still going to do it?
When you say psychological safety, I see psychological safety as like the willingness to speak up and to disagree with something without being worried that it's going to come back and hurt you in the past. Is that what you mean when you say that, Kat?
It also could be maybe I'm misusing the phrase, but if we're in a decision, our group is making a decision, and I feel like this is not going to go well, and I've spoken up about it, and maybe it's maybe it is catastrophizing, but maybe it's not. Maybe it's my experiences. Maybe, do we just ignore that? Does everyone have to feel safe with the decision to move forward?
I understand what you're saying. I think as a facilitator of these moments, if you said, I'm uneasy about this, I would say, okay, Kat, and this is what I mean when I say, I approach this like a scientist, not a politician. I'm not trying to convince you, and my job is not to be the objections police and make sure that objections don't get through. My job is simply to test that. And so I might ask you questions like, okay, tell me the data that you're holding, Kat. Tell me where that's coming from. How recent is that data? Is that data coming from this context, or is it coming from a completely different context? So how relevant is that information? And again, I'm not trying to get you to defend yourself. I'm just trying to surface exactly where the source of it is. And then I might say, Kat, okay, so you've got some data. Tell me about the harm that you think is going to come to us. Why won't this let us achieve our purpose? Be specific in how you see this harm sort of coming up. And if your answer is sufficient on both of those, you have relevant data and you can describe accurately the harm, I'm not going to block the objection from happening. I mean, the worst case scenario is now you just work with the proposer to integrate that objection and update it in a way that's safe to try. But I am going to ask you to sort of make sure that I'm surfacing the right data before I'm letting it stop the process and actually move into like an integrative moment. Because I want to be careful about what we let into that space, or we could end up swirling the drain forever. I think most people understand that.
Yeah.
Okay. So again, I'm working in systems that aren't adopting self-management. So I have to often talk about, if you're not doing this whole scale, what are some of the simple ways or tools that you could use, or phrases that you can say to change decision-making behavior? And so I'll encourage people to say things like, does anyone have data this is unsafe to try? Or I think this would be safe to try with this edit. Or it's not my first choice, but it's safe to try. So we'll often give people scripts and things to actually say. All right. I'm going to stop there. That's the end of this. If you don't remember anything else from what I've shared, these are some of the critical sort of mindsets that underpin all of the practices that I talk about. So of course, blocking mindsets are authority in the most senior roles, enabling being authority as close to the work as possible. A blocking mindset being, is this the right decision? Something that is more helpful or useful or skillful is it safe to try? And then as a leader, instead of prioritizing harmony or what we call nice culture, prioritizing learning, prioritizing moving forward. These are sort of the underpinning mindsets that we work with companies to help adopt. And with that, thank you so much. I'll stick around for another 5 minutes for questions if anybody has any, but thank you for having me.
Did anybody put questions in the chat that did not get answered by Alexis? Let's start with those. Go ahead and feel free to just speak up.
Alexis, I've used a version of this before, and I love it, and I appreciate the people that came before me that created it. Oftentimes, I get to the point where a decision is made, but there's still a lack of understanding of what the decision actually was. So people will say, yes, it's safe to try, but in order for me to commit, I need to understand what it is that we just agreed to more. So
Yeah, there are two things that I think about with this. The first one is sort of pre-proposal framing. So like before you get into the proposal moment, and then post-proposal communications. So in pre-proposal framing, if you're the decision owner, you're not just going to come into a room, especially for complex, cross-functional, high-risk decisions, and give people information for the very first time. That would be irresponsible to try and get your executive team or your team to make a decision. So what we often encourage people to do is to signal early that they are making a decision, whether that's in a Slack channel or in another space, and ask for data or information to share early drafts or brainstorms that might be related to capturing that information or proposals. And so that information is already available to your stakeholders before you ever enter into the room. That is like a do not pass go, do not collect $200 thing, especially for cross-functional decisions. So there's pre-proposal framing, which helps with that. And then there's capture and communicate. and which is like how we communicate the decision out. And so we'll often create like a template for organizations that include, you know, what were the trade-offs that you discussed and were willing to make? What process did you use? That includes sort of like key nuggets of context so that the folks who are executing this decision have a one-pager to return to and kind of go through, okay, here's what happened. It's sort of organized information. It's not too much information, but it's just enough to give you context around like why this was made, the trade-offs we were willing to make, and how we execute it. And so we'll often say, if it's not written down, it's not decided. You know, it's got to be written down. It's got to be stored someplace so that people can go back and reference it. Those help take the edge off a little bit.
Thank you.
Did anybody else have a question for Alexis?
Alexis, do you see any kind of key leading reasons why companies aren't open to doing a significant section or company-wide self-management?
Yeah, there are huge reasons why. I mean, primarily we're going to be looking at like legal regulatory decisions or like reasons for the companies that we work with. So thinking about like risk management, everybody is going to need a manager. Everybody's going to need somebody to report to. Sometimes if companies are publicly traded, then the legalities of it or ownership structure require a certain level of formal authority or formal directorship. And so some people have to have director roles. And so there are ways to integrate these bigger systems into self-management, but the sort of like overhead cost of shifting the default hierarchical HRIS captured system into something that is completely new for a company that is 11,000, 100,000 employees is really prohibitive. And it's just like too much of an investment, and it slows people down. I mean, we saw this at Zappos, and we were only 1,500 people at the time. It was an incredible slowing in order to get everything into Glass Frog, in order to like train everybody on what needed to happen, how they should move, new thresholds. And so I find that like these sort of like Trojan mice practices are much more effective at getting to the sort of hierarchical adaptivity that we want without sort of implementing the larger formal systems of self-management.
Okay, thanks so much for sharing that. I find it ironic too that the end, like self-management would actually be significantly lower cost on a version of that, albeit considerable cost for a large organization to take that first step, and maybe a division or a location or something else could go that direction. But yeah, again, in highly regulated things, I can see that being a significant barrier.
Well, what we'll often do is we'll pull out what we call SLAM teams outside of the hierarchy. And so we will pull like cross-functional self-managed teams that are responsible for critical priorities across the organization who will operate in a self-managed way. But just translating that back into the broader system is a huge endeavor that not many companies are willing to undertake. And honestly, it's not the most fun work. Having done that before, it is backbreaking to try and get everybody into a system of self-management that is explicit, redefining, reporting structures, who's responsible for your promotion, who's not responsible for your promotion, who's responsible for feedback, making sure you get feedback before you're pipped, before you're exited from the organization. Like those are, just incredibly dense processes, and it's not the most fun work to do, transitioning the back end of a large organization to being self-managed. This is more my opinion.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, look, I've got some pals in the chat. Andrea, hi. So lovely to see you. Fun to have some people here. Daniel Riley, nice to see you.
I think that could be a whole separate topic, talking about transforming too, because a lot of the cases that Dom and I are finding are companies that started off self-managing, which is a whole different animal than not starting off self-managing and transforming to that and having to kind of replace things while the airplane is in the air. I could see that being a wonderful monthly topic. Yeah. Anybody else have anything else for Alexis?
Do we have time for one more?
Yeah, I'll do anything for you, Andrea. Go for it.
I have a client who has been on this path for 3 years, and there is a new tension emerging of it should only come from the teams. There should be nothing happening at the enterprise level. which is kind of where we started. And it's almost it's a new power battle because the CEO brought us in to begin the enterprise and team practices, but now there's a subsection that's saying like it's anathema to self-management to do anything at the enterprise level. And so, you know, we're managing through and it's just another example of challenges. But what you do run into that kind of thing, and it's this balance of like purist versus non-purist. I feel like I'm more of a non-purist. You have to transition to and scaffold. So curious if you've come across that.
Yeah. So the problem you're seeing is that now there is because they're adopting self-management practices, they are rejecting any kind of like enterprise coordination effort or, you know, from folks.
Yeah.
I mean, I try to remind people, at least this is from my experience, that hierarchy is not a bad word. I try to remind people of that. I think what we get caught up in is hierarchy is bad, but what we mean is hierarchy of title, of tenure, or static hierarchy, where somebody is promoted into a position and stays there regardless of how they show up in the rest of the organization. But hierarchy of work hierarchy, period, is an essential operating principle of any living system. It is required, especially at scale, at system scale, but we just need to think about it as a hierarchy of work. And so what I would think is that there is a hierarchy of work that needs to happen at the enterprise level: vision setting, prioritization, mission setting. What is important to us? What will we do and what won't we do at a really high level? Somebody who has line of sight and the scope of sight to understand all those things absolutely needs to be considering those questions. And that likely is happening at the highest tiers of the organization. And so just because we're self-managed does not mean that we don't need guardrails and vision and priorities and strategy. And there is a large role for executives to play in continuing to do that. What I just try to guard against is that if that CEO or that COO shows up in another room, that they are showing up appropriately, not bringing that CEO energy or authority with them into other circles or other teams, but when they're showing up in those moments, that they're showing up in service to, as a stakeholder of whoever is leading that particular work. That's the most important thing to like nail, so that people can see that like hierarchy can still exist, but we can also invert that hierarchy in meaningful ways when it matters to the work.
Thank you.
Okay. Andrew, you know where to find me if you ever want to chat more about this, but I'm going to take off from here, folks. Thank you so much for having me. Please connect on LinkedIn and I'll share the deck with Kat and Dom, who can share it out afterwards. It's been a pleasure. Take care. Have a great day.
Thanks, Alexis. So even though she has to drop, we're hoping to hear from you guys. Dom and I just launched this here in the United States because we were looking for a place to connect with other people interested in self-management. So we'd love to know who you are. If you got anything from this presentation, if we could hit a raised hand, that'll allow us to create a queue. So do you mind if we go from there? And thanks for staying on. Hit it, Dom. I think you're first.
All right, I'm first one. I'll put my hand in. And hey, thanks. So I'll say the one thing I liked. I liked a lot of it. One thing was just, you know, thanking people for their point. It's the validation, the awareness. A lot of people are just bringing things up, so the team is aware of it, right? Whether we actioned it or not. And that first kind of reaction to a new idea is a lot of the safety part. And kind of the point I wanted to make was it's actually to Charlie. Hey, Charlie, you know, you're talking about asking about making sure we're actually agreed, like what we're actually agreed on. And one thing I've seen is really smart people in a group making a decision, and you know, they're asking questions, and all those questions are like confirmation biasing. Like, are we on the same page? Yeah, I think, because I've got an idea in my head. So one thing that worked was, how big are the consequences of what we just decided? Like getting them to estimate how large the decision was and doing quick planning poker. And if the results of that are all over the place, then you realize people aren't actually aligned. And it seemed to be pretty good, you know, a quick planning poker. That's like a agile sizing, you know.
She brought up impact in her X and Y constraint also. So yeah. So just kind of gauging that real quick, and that highlighted the disagreement. But that's it. And that was just a point. And Charlie, you got your hand up, so
Over to you, sir.
Oh, you asked about. So I'm Charlie. I took a leap a couple of years ago to start my own future work practice, and thank you, and am actively looking for clients or a new values aligned company that I can do some work with. And the distinction between a objection and a hesitation, I think, was really helpful, and kind of a new piece for me. And I think explain, it as I think back on some past uses, I see how that could have made things even smoother. But I've discovered even a rinky-dink version of this is far superior to whatever most default processes are.
Let me just respond to that really quick. That
Yeah.
I can't name who, but Dom and I are in talks to do some recruiting for self-management transformers. So happy to set up a time with you. Just drop one of us a note, and we'd love to have a chat.
100%.
Great. Matt. Thanks, Charlie.
Thank you.
Hey, everybody. Matt Spohr. I'm from the Teal team. We published the Teal Landscape Report now in its third year, if you haven't seen it. I'll 1+ on Charlie's hesitancy versus objection. I think that's great. I'm going to go use that all sorts of places. I also didn't know about the Bain study she put up at the beginning of the presentation, so I'm going to go find that, because I think when you're trying to talk to people about changing the way they do business, they want to see, is it going to make my business better? And they want some data. I think that could be a good source.
Yeah. We're trying to collect that same thing too. That's part of our journey to go visit cases and whatnot, is to be able to firsthand say, here are the results we've seen from self-managing organizations. Totally agree. Who's next? Erica?
Yeah. Hey, Erica Viena. I live in Northern California. I, like Charlie, kind of shifted from being a technology and product executive to creating an organization that seeks to help other organizations become self-managing. And I actually have not been able to get a single client in the last year on that. It's just super hard in the United States to get people to really believe that this is something that they can do, that they can shift their businesses toward. So I really appreciated the data, as Matthew said, because I think that's one of the things that really is important to American business people. I have a big European network too, so part of me is kind of leaning toward, well, do I kind of shift over to another continent? But I really would like to make this work in the US. I think it's part of my purpose. And I wrote this book, Organizing for Impact, and it's just kind of it's a tome on how to go from being an individual leader to being collaborative leader to doing this in teams to doing this in organizations. It's really about creating self-managing organizations, and there's a roadmap in there. So, no one's discovering this yet. I don't know if anyone ever will. I wrote it to build a business around. So, if anyone wants to collaborate, I do have affiliates on my website, which is transformatic.com. I'm trying all kinds of things to try to build this thing and create visibility for self-management and myself and others doing this work. So please feel free to connect.
Use this community. So we're committing to the monthly meetings. There's a high-low platform. Anybody who wants to set up workshops, collaboration discussions, specific topics. I'm working with a corporate rebel group that's talking about creating kind of a framework or algorithm for determining the ratio of your virtual to on-site collaboration policies. If you want to use one to meet other people or for recruiting or collaborate on sales, that's what this is for. This is a self-managing community itself. And so again, just because Dom and I are running monthly meetings doesn't mean that that's all that this has to be. Feel free to help drive that and we'll help.
Thank you.
Yep.
Appreciate it.
Who's next? Doug?
Hi. Dominic and Kat, thank you so much for creating this community. It's super cool. And Dom, thanks for the invite today. I'm so glad I got to come. And I'm a a coach, a leadership coach, and an internal family systems therapist. And the focus of my work is really in working with the actual individuals. And so I loved this this particular presentation because my brain was really spinning around curiosity based on like how, as folks are coming to the table to make decisions, how I'm just going to say in simplistic terms, how centered and grounded are each individual in the room as they're trying to make decisions? What are all the conflicting voices going on inside that individual on a micro level? And then how does that then impact the functioning of decision making and therefore the team and the overall outcomes, right? And so it's just a curiosity I wanted to just name and bring into the room, because we all are, we're so layered as each individual, and we've all got so much shit going on inside us, right? Like, how do we speak to that in a team while also recognizing that we need to get the work done? And that's sort of maybe a question just to ponder, but it's one that's in the back of my mind. So
Can that be a problem? Can you name a scenario where we can
where that can be a problem?
Yeah.
So I just got off a call this morning with a senior VP in an HR function in a tech company, and I've been working with her for about 2 years. And one of her biggest personal challenges is trying to put voice to her expertise and the truth as she knows it in a team of founders that doesn't necessarily provide for a whole lot of psychological safety. So so my efforts in supporting her are helping her sort of be able to internally distill the fears from the states of confidence, clarity, courage, and helping her lead from that place of clarity and courage, even knowing that, the asshole at the top of the pyramid is probably going to say something mean or criticize or shoot her down. And it's amazing to see the progress. She's been able to sort of show up in her truth and speak her truth, which might be saying no, right? Rather than just saying yes and then dealing with the outfall on the back end. So she's been able to lead with courage.
Kind of like, I think what I hear you saying is grit. Like, how do you coach grit?
Yeah,
I mean, Duckworth, who wrote a book, right?
Yeah, was that Angela Duckworth? I don't remember that, but great book, right? But so the framework that I might share is, from internal family systems work, leading from self-energy, and self-energy is how do we expand the self-energy we have inside, which is characterized by Dick Schwartz came up with these C words of clarity, confidence, courage, compassion, creativity. Those are non-agenda based states of being that really ground us and allow us to be really present. And how do we cultivate that in ourselves so that we can show up and be ready to get in the sandbox and experiment and play? Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Thank you.
I'd love a follow-up conversation on that too, but I do want everybody to get a chance to talk too. So thank you, Doug. Peter?
I will speak briefly. I'm Peter Laughter. I live here in Frederick, Maryland. Just moved here. I am a public speaker, and I speak on how in times of great stress and disruption, most leaders grasp for more control where the greatest give more of it away. I've been an entrepreneur in the recruiting and staffing industry for most of my career, but about in the late aughts, I had an experience working on a board of a Quaker school that fundamentally changed my understanding of leadership, that was mirrored in my company in solving a really wicked problem that I had an horribly painful, stupid, expensive solution for that I was convinced was right. And I had an employee get in my face who said, "What you're suggesting is a violation of our core values." And that interaction fundamentally changed my life and set me on a course of action. I'm now really focusing on speaking as the first leg in my journey with distributed leadership. I've developed a talk the pyramid has collapsed, where I talk about the fact that humanity has entered the most disruptive, innovative time in human history, and everything we've learned about leadership and organizational structure is incompatible. And I talk about how to pave a way out. So that's me. I put my LinkedIn link in the chat. Would love to connect with you all, brilliant people.
Great, thanks. And are you Teal Team?
I'm a big fan of Teal Team, but I'm
Okay.
not. I don't wear the jersey. Yeah,
Got it.
yet. Or
Okay.
Doug and Matt are on Teal Team, and maybe others here.
Oh, okay. Oh, Doug's Teal Team. Got it. Great. Nice to meet you. And Paulina is next.
Yes, hi, I'm representing Poland here, so another continent also. And the community of Teal in Poland, we have 4,000 members, but not too much active, but I think that we can say 100 is active. And the aim is to show that in Poland we can do it and we can be Teal also. And now we are preparing the map of companies that are using the progressive approach, because Teal is not a good word. It's a bit magic. So we are using progressive, and we will see what will happen, how many will just declare be progressive. And I'm a sociocratic trainer knowing holacracy and helping also companies to on these discoveries of the old system sometimes, or these traditional things, because as Peter, you said Quakers is something that is already existing. And we are just discovering it and spreading it more. This is the thing. So this is from Poland.
Very nice. I met some people at the Corporate Rebels Global Summit just a couple weeks ago from Poland. And they have a virtual reality training for leaders that helps you determine like what your role is in helping or hindering the self-management transformation in your.
Yeah, this is the 4 Results company.
Yes, you know them?
Yeah.
Great, cool. Yeah, we're talking to them. They seem really interesting. Good stuff. Anybody else who has not introduced themselves? We've got a few more people on here who haven't said hi yet. Yeah. Mark, have you introduced yourself? Feel free.
Okay. Hey, I'm glad I could squeeze in here. I didn't want to take anybody's time. I'm Mark Andreas. I'm a professor of business at Kuiper College here in very, very cold Grand Rapids, Michigan. If I turn the camera on, you'd see way too much snow.
Another neighbor. I'm in Indiana.
Oh yeah, not too far from South Bend. I've been there several times. So yeah, I'm new to the self-management community. I love teaching about management, and I've begun to introduce some of these concepts to my students, and hope to help companies someday down the road. So I'm new and appreciate learning from everybody.
What college did you say it was? University?
I'm at a tiny little Bible college here in Grand Rapids called Kuiper College. It's Kuyper.
Nice. Well, nice to meet you and welcome. Great. So before you guys dissipate too quickly, and I know we drop off, and feel free to do as we're all self-managing, we'd love to know, what do you want from this content? We're looking at tools, approaches, Holacracy 1, specifically cases, experts without being too much expertise, but like well-known cases like Alexis's Zappos, and we also had who's our first one? Doug from Morningstar. But what else would you like to see in this community? And maybe not just speakers. Maybe we do a workshop where we try and capture a case and write cases out together, or swarm them into a wiki. I'd love to see something like that. There is one, but nobody's maintaining it. We're looking into seeing if we can pick it up or get access to it. So share ideas before you drop off, and let us know in the last couple of minutes, or drop us a note and let us know what you'd like to see in the next few weeks or upcoming. Anything else, Dom?
No, that's great, and the hard data is great, so we're definitely going to post these slides on Hilo, and just wanted to push. We've got our January. Like, I hope everybody has a great holidays, right? And in January we are going to be in Austin, so nice and warm down there. We're going to be talking to Albert Gonzalez and other staff at Bangor Sausage and Beer Garden, and talking about how self-management is working in their the restaurant industry and the service industry, and just the trials and tribulations, successes, and lessons learned that they've had. So we're really looking forward to it. And we hope you can join us in January. But this has been great meeting you all here today, and this was a lovely conversation. So
Yeah.
it
Thanks
really
for
made-
those who stayed on, and hope to see you next month. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.